Again, I'm just going to introduce the topic really quickly. So the title for this segment was Israel Turns to African Journalists and Influencers Post-October 7 Media Offensive. And this is based on the fact that 3 days ago, Al Jazeera published an investigation narrated by Nicholas Murhead into the South African Jewish Board of Deputies sponsoring of trips to Israel for African journalists. The report credits our guest today, Hassen, with this, that the trips have been sponsored.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you so much, Hassen. Thank you for joining us today. I can hear you now.
So sorry to cut your introduction.
No, that's absolutely fine. I mean, the people are here really to listen to you and not to me. So I'm happy for you to cut me off at any point.
I'm sorry.
No reason to apologize.
The conversation that you have, and I'm pleased to be with you.
Thank you, as am I with you. So Hassen, I was just saying that, of course, Al Jazeera published this investigation 3 days ago into the South Africa Jewish Board of Deputies sponsoring trips to Israel. And of course, they credit you with finding this out. So can you just kind of tell our listeners what is going on with these sponsored trips? What is it that you found out?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the Zionist project have for 70 odd years or more not only dispossessed Palestinians, occupied them, moved them from their lands, ethnically cleansed them, killing them consistently, but it took a high point around the last 2 years or so where this incremental genocide was full force and without any gloves on. It was broadcast 24 hours on our channels. Unlike other Holocausts and genocides, we could see this live. Every citizen was empowered with a telephone in front of them, and they could access live what was happening in Gaza, in particular, where close to 75,000 or more people, at least, were directly killed, mostly women and children, and countless numbers under rubble, right? So in many ways, their military victory over Palestinians was not enough for them. They had to sell a lie to the populations of the world, because people were taking to the streets. Every street corner all over the world, in the capitals of the US, Europe, everywhere, people were marching and basically were exposing the lie that Israel is a democracy, Israel is incapable of committing a genocide. The never again was repeated now by what they were doing. So Hasbara got a big knock. And what's interesting, because my complaint took place, if you like, during this phase of the genocide. But post this genocide, they've invested a lot of money, millions of rands and dollars, to try and change the narrative, because while they may have secured some levels of military bullying and success, they've lost the moral, political, and justice narrative to the world. And one of the ways they do this is to take people on trips. You know, they take people on culture trips, presenting themselves as being a progressive Western nation amongst marauding ancient Arabs and others who don't respect basic civil liberties. So they were trying to sell that lie. And journalists is one of them that they targeted. But not only journalists, they targeted political leaders. In South Africa, we all recall at the time when the journalists went to Israel, they had the Democratic Alliance, Patriotic Alliance, ACDP, the African Christians. All of them went there and variously lied. They denied that they were going on this junket, the politicians, and until they were pressured and investigations were had, and they had to admit that, yes, they went on a fact-finding mission. So they neutralized the politicians. Then they neutralized the journalists. They took students from WITS and SRCs and others. They've done this all over. So it's one of the tactics to try and recover the moral high ground that they lost in the society. And the one that they do around journalism is the one that I dealt with in particular.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, Can you tell us as well how you came to discover what was going on, in particular with the journalists from South Africa and
Well,
these trips?
in fairness, I must grant other comrades. A number of people were whispering that the Sunday Times didn't declare that its trip to what they call the Holy Land, who paid for it, etc. And what I just thought was, okay, I look at this particular one. I think Dr. Shoaib Mandra was one of the first people to complain, and that this happened, and I looked at the article and I said, okay, it's true. I didn't know. I learned this subsequently. Mine was quite separate from him, but parallel. I then read through the article and I said, uh, the basic law of journalism is that you need to declare your sources. In fact, not your private sources, but your sources of funding. In fact, I think the best price is for journalists not to be sponsored, not to be duped by lobby groups and that. And if by such a means you do get sponsored by some group, the basic line is to say, listen, reader, this comes from Hotel so and so or Hasbara Incorporated, etc. So that the reader will say, we attach so much salt to this, we know what it is, but we'll read it, but we know that we're not going to buy and drink their juice, right?
Hmm.
So when I read this, I said, okay, let me just take a little bit of a look. And I glanced through other media. I went to the Citizen. I looked particularly for those that I thought had a bit of a right wing or conservative bent. I looked at the Citizen. I went wider. And then I also went to Biz News. And I found that the very people that they were interviewing in the Sunday Times were the same people that the Citizen and Biz News were covering. Then I thought, no, okay, uh, but none of them are declaring. Why is it that all of them, in their own agency, their own private organizational uh, presence, right? Why is it that they could simply decide, oh no, for us, the best rule is that we shouldn't declare this? But they know these are members, both the Citizen and Sunday Times were implicated in the Cathy sexual hearings of media, where media were accused of taking brown envelopes. And they were quite willing then to take this inquiry. This is about five years ago, by the time when I did the case. So they were aware, and they're members of the press council. If you go anywhere to the press council that adjudicates these cases, it's a voluntary adjudication. They call it co-management or co-governance with the media and the owners of media and citizens. All of them have had cases against them. So this is very fresh in their mind. And I found it really strange that people who are in the public eye, who've been accused of unfair reporting, who are aware of the press code, could actually make such a basic mistake, which I call in the various media advocacy programs, the 101 of journalism. You should not take money. And if you do take money from some source, you will declare it. And they didn't do that. And I simply checked whom they spoke to from the Palestinian side, whom they spoke to from the Israeli side. And then I found a way to say, listen, guys, you guys have to do this. In fact, the Sunday Times tried 3 times to publish corrections, and I was unhappy. And ultimately, the judgment that you found was the press ombud at that time, Professor Franz Kruger, basically said they didn't apologize in a manner as is demanded by the press code.
Hmm. And I mean, it's very interesting as well because the Al Jazeera report, they do interview the Sunday Times editor. And one of the ways in which he defends himself, beyond saying that it was just a human error and it shouldn't have been done, was he also says, oh, but the story actually was quite balanced. Like he interviewed some Israelis and some Palestinians,
Yeah.
and I think there is like an ethical question as well about what does balance mean, not only when we're talking about Palestine and Israel, but really in any case where you're talking about a colonizer sort of situation. There is a question of access as well for journalists in Palestine. The entire West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza, like access to them is governed by Israel and not by
Yeah.
any sort of Palestinian body. And of course we know as well that the Palestinian Authority is also a compromised body in that regard.
Yeah.
So I think, like the this attempt, to kind of defend themselves also kind of falls a bit flat on its face. But moving towards another aspect of the report that was published, the report notes that such sponsored trips were common practice for journalists in the West before October 7. But the decline in support for Israel among those people in those countries after the start of the genocide has led kind of these pro-Israel bodies to turn towards Africa and the global South more generally, actually. Why do you think this is the case? And I mean, also the countries that are mentioned, there's also a really interesting incongruence between the fact that the countries that are mentioned in the report as being targeted are South Africa, Cameroon, Rwanda, um, and Ethiopia, as far
Morocco.
as I remember, and
Morocco
Morocco,
too.
yes, Morocco as well. And the reason I
Mm.
ask this, of course, is because there is a difference, right, between South Africa and then the other four states, which is that the other four states are very clear Israeli allies, whereas South Africa is not. And so, I mean, how can you kind of make sense of this?
Yeah, Dr. Abdullah, I mean, let me be clear. We have gained, if you like, a political transformation in this country, but the social governance, the ethos of black people, of democratic anti-racists being in power, anti-sexists being in power, is highly contested, more so now than before. Now, Trump has seemed to have emboldened a number of reactionaries all over the world. And these guys believe that they have a presence in this country. Over a year or so ago, Rob Hershoff said publicly on a public platform, I think it was a Biz News platform, that he would be mobilizing podcasters and billionaires to try and make sure or mobilize or influence the society not to vote, if you like, for historically liberation or political parties. Well, it's a bit out there whether these other groups are still liberation parties, but he was really referring to the ANC, EFF, and MK party. And uh, and to be honest with you, the guy I was complaining about in an SABC matter, which has just been adjudicated upon now, where they ruled against the SABC, was this second in charge of the Israeli embassy, Ariel Seidman. He features in one of these podcasts and basically says what he wants, right? So the point is, I'm not convinced that we all that much different. We have a sense where you and I can talk now. No one's going to come knock on their door, break it down, and arrest me because he's hearing me on. So we have this democratic space. This is the one thing that we've got, and we need to sharpen. We're not doing that well, but we have to still sharpen it because the unions, civic organizations, all of us are not as strong as we used to be. But there's a following this program, going back to the Al Jazeera broadcast. This ruling was sometime, I think, in July last year, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way the society works, when the public broadcaster doesn't report you, when you're talking about the Sunday papers, the opinion makers don't report you, the story ceases to become news. As I'm now trying to demonstrate, the SABC were wrapped over the knuckles over a matter that, of course, we will talk about another time.
Mm-hmm.
And the public broadcaster doesn't talk about it. So what you need to find out, more than the countries that they've gone to, I don't think that is, for me, that significant, is that they know that South Africa is an influence, is an influence, if you like, for the continent. South Africa plays a big role on the continent, tries to make sure that Palestine gets recognized in the AU, Israel gets kicked out of the AU. It's based in Ethiopia. Ethiopia has large numbers of Muslim and Christian populations, and it's targeted. But Ethiopia has a different resonance for many of us. It was the one African country that was never really colonized. But there's a sense where Israel has been selling its so-called skills, repressive and surveillance skills, as well as its so-called skills around water management, etc. So they engage these countries on other bases. Security is one part of them, and controlling your own population. So the reasons are not simply that where do we go? I mean, Cameroon and Eritrea are two countries in the whole of the continent. They don't recognize the state of Palestine, whatever the limitations. I understand where you as a Palestinian would feel. But it's symbolic to note that those two countries don't recognize it. Eritrea for different reasons, but Cameroon, Yes, Central Africa. So Israel has not stopped. They've not stopped. They've increased the work that they've been doing since they've been losing. And what we need to do as civil society, diverse, democratic, and decentralized as we are, is to realize what it is and increasingly come together without necessarily compromising our independence. But what's critical is that they kill journalists in Palestine. They neutralize journalists outside Palestine. They neutralize citizens in Europe, elsewhere, banning the BDS, etc. They target MPs in this country. They target MPs everywhere. It's part of the playbook. The MPs in the UK, some of the activists have done more work than us. They've actually listed which MP has gone on how many trips to Israel and what it costs. Yes, some of our MPs talk about Glenys Breitenbach says her trip for 7 days to Israel cost 110,000 rand. But look here, Doc, you and I are talking about journalists being compromised. When are we going to have this discussion, this continued discussion about members of parliament who have been compromised?
People
Where's
who are
that
elected,
case?
of course, and accountable to the voters.
There are a high level of accountability. The journalist gets
Absolutely.
compromised, so they don't report. Parliament gets compromised, so they don't ask questions. I mean, so I wrote a naughty poem in August where I said, first they came for the journalists, and I did not speak up. Then they came for the MPs, and I did not speak up. When they came for me, a mere mortal who loved books and friendships, no one is around for me, and it goes on,
I'm always happy to end on the note of poetry, Hassan. Thank you so much for joining us, for casting light upon this really important topic. We will be back, dear listeners, after this break. Thank you again, Hassan. Salaam alaikum. And, may Allah accept from all of us.